Going to be in John 9, 1 to 12 this morning if you have a Bible that you're following along with, or you can just follow along with me through the text as I'll be sharing it and moving through the verses. And Jesus uses in this story, John 9, 1 to 12, mud to heal a man that was born blind. It's his sixth sign that Jesus is God with us. So John starts his gospel reminding us this is God with us. This is not just another encouraging person walking the earth. It's not even just another prophet. It's actually God in flesh. And then there's these signs in John's gospel, 7 of them as the gospel starts and moves through chapter 11. 7 signs of Jesus' divinity that affirm this is God with us. And so the signs of light, we've been calling them this winter. I want to remind you of kind of where we've been. The first sign, Jesus turns water to wine. We were there several weeks back. Then Jesus heals the nobleman's son. Then Jesus heals the paralyzed man at the healing pool. Then Jesus feeds the 5,000. Last week, Jesus was walking on water. And the other miracle, if you were here last week, you remember what I said? Walking on water, a sign of his divinity, that even the wind and waves in creation obey him. And the other miracle there we don't want to miss is his voice calms the disciples' fears, right? So that's miraculous. The voice of Jesus that's still alive today, that's still accessible to you, calms the disciples' fears. And then today's sign, Jesus heals a man born blind. And Jesus is the light of the world. Again, something we're told in John 1. And those signs prove why he is the light of the world. Jesus brings the world we all crave, the world we want, the world we hunger for. And including in this sixth sign, he illuminates chronic darkness by bringing light to someone who was born into darkness by their blindness. And as we move into this sixth sign, I'd like us to do this with this word in mind: enlighten. Since we've been talking about light this winter, how about we get around this word enlighten as we move through John 9, 1 to 12. I have just a dictionary definition, copy and paste it up there for you. To give someone greater knowledge and understanding about a subject or situation. I've bolded the one that I would like us to focus on. This is actually in a dictionary. Give someone spiritual knowledge or insight. This is what Jesus does in this text. He obviously, similar to the walking on water, what did I say? That is the sign, but let us not stay on the surface of the water. Let's move into the deeper lessons of the text. Jesus calming the fears of his disciples with his voice. Same thing today. Obviously, the sign is this: Jesus using mud to heal someone born blind, and yet deeply beneath that, Jesus is sharing spiritual knowledge with us, insight with us as that happens, and you'll see that as we move through the verses. So Jesus enlightens in this passage, right? Because the passage actually opens with a spiritual question. I don't know if you ever caught that. Maybe you've read this before. Have you ever caught that it opens with a spiritual question? Verses 1 through 3, John 9 say this: As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, here's the spiritual question: Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. So Jesus sheds light. That's terminology I'll use alongside the word enlighten. Jesus sheds light on a spiritual understanding of pain and suffering. His response to the question, who sinned, this man or his parents? It was common in the days of Jesus for folks to believe that any human suffering was the result of one's sins or the result of their parents' sins, some generational thing that mysteriously was passed down. And so they ask Jesus, they just think he's going to say, well, it was him or his parents. Well, Jesus enlightens them, sheds light on this, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I want to talk first about this, how this question is unfortunately not stuck in the days of Jesus, but is today as well, right? Like, I wish thinking like that was stuck back then, but it's not. And it's why we still need Jesus today to shed light on questions like that. I had a professor, his name was Joe Modica. He was a chaplain at Eastern University where I went to undergrad. When I was there, he would teach some classes as well. And years before he taught me, he was a pastor, seminary graduate, Sunday school teacher at his church. And he was in one of those churches where it wasn't easy to become a Sunday school teacher. You know those kind of churches where it's like you almost have to go to seminary just to be the Sunday school teacher at the church, something like that. He was in one of those places. So he had a lot of understanding about God and theology, and he was in a bad car accident, unfortunately. He would always share this story with his classes. When we would discuss his suffering, he barely survived this crash, was hospitalized for months because of it. He became very weak and was fragile coming out of survival, really, needing all kinds of time for parts of his body to heal. And as folks from his church in Christian circles began to visit him, one lady visited him, and at the end of the visit, she leaned toward him and said to him, and it caught him off guard in a cold way. She said, "I hope you confess the sin God is trying to show you through this." And the warmth of her visit just suddenly felt so cold to him, and he felt alone again in his suffering. Because if God was trying to use that moment, he would tell us, if God was trying to use that moment to reveal some sin, I wasn't in on it. Right? Like, it felt like if that was what was happening, like I was left in the dark, left alone. He had no idea why what happened to him happened to him. And as far as he could tell, there was no uncovered sins God needed to uncover. Right? We all have sin in our lives, but he had no real major thing that needed uncovering. Now, he would contrast that visit with another Christian. There was a Christian he didn't even know at the time. They became friends, but he didn't even know this Christian at the time. And this person came to visit him at the hospital every week. And he would walk up to the bedside and just say gently, "Joe, my name is Chris Hall." And the two became friends, by the way, and they both ended up at Eastern University. I had Dr. Hall as a professor as well, and so they would both share the story with us. But he didn't know him then. He would walk up to the hospital bedside and say, "My name is Chris Hall, you don't know me, but if it's okay, I would just like to sit in the corner chair for a little while and just be there and just be silent. And I might silently spend some time praying for you to heal well. Is that okay?" And so he did that for weeks. He had this routine. And Dr. Hall would then share with us, he felt called by God early in his life as a young adult to walk with those in pain and suffering. He felt like that was his calling. So one time he had a job as a pastor, and then he became a chaplain at a psychiatric hospital and offered spiritual care and services to those in the psychiatric hospital. And eventually he became a college professor. But the through line for his various careers was this broader calling of walking with those in pain and suffering. So something he would do is go visit hospitals and just silently say to folks, "Can I sit quietly and pray?" You know, it's good that God calls people to offer that kind of healing work in our world. But for every Dr. Hall, there's some other person who wonders, is that person laying in the hospital bed because of their sin or their parents' sin, right? Like this, back to this question, like it still is around. It's still there. And the good news is Jesus rejects that. He rejects that, as the disciples ask it. So this connection we try to make between sin and suffering is rejected by Jesus. And a deeper Christian interpretation of this passage is that Jesus actually rejects human explanations of suffering. Remember, this is God with us. He's showing us signs of his divinity. And so not only does he reject this link that every suffering is attached to one's sins, but he also rejects human explanations of suffering and instead says, look to the works of God. Look to the works of God. So he teaches his disciples and us, enlightens us to look to the works of God. Look for who God is. And Jesus is about to show us who God is. So John 9, 4-7, picking up after verse 3 there. He says we must work the works of him. I love this verse. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back, able to see. So Jesus sheds light on his and our limited time to work the works of God. And part of working the works of God is to create spaces for healing. Right? So Jesus has limited time. First, he tells his disciples, quit looking for human explanations. Look to the works of God. Look to me. I reject your human explanations. Look to me. Look to me and see the works of God. And Jesus has limited time to work the works of God. Why? Because the cross is coming. That's what he means by that. The cross is coming. So again, we're kind of entering into Lent. This is a great passage to be kind of stepping into that season. Jesus says, the night is coming while it's day. Let's work the works of God. But see, we're also invited to see that our time too is limited, right? We have limited time to be open, to be a conduit of the works of God, right? Why is our time limited? Because from dust we came, and to dust we shall return. Our time in life is limited. It's okay to remember that. Lent invites us to remember that, not to be afraid, but to remember. Remember, Jesus calms the fears of his disciples with his voice. Don't be afraid. Let Jesus calm the fears. It's okay to recognize we're limited. While day is here, let us be open to working the works of God while we can, while we have time. And for us, we may not be able to spit on the ground, make mud, and heal someone born blind. Why? Because that's a sign of Jesus' divinity. We're not divine. So what is our invitation? Well, we can create spaces for healing. We can create spaces for people to meet Christ. We can create spaces where we sit silently with those who need healing, like the hospital story I shared from Dr. Hall. And what about you, just in your own life? I mean, what would it look like to assist the creation of space for healing? I think that's our question, right? As a church, we could ask that. What does it look like to create spaces for healing? That's part of working the works of God. And Jesus sheds light on how he can use anything, mud, to bring about healing. And I would just like to invite this reflection question. Has Jesus ever used something you wouldn't expect to bring healing? You don't need to answer that out loud. Just invite you to reflect on that. I mean, has Jesus ever used anything you wouldn't expect to bring healing? Because that's who Jesus is. I mean, he makes this mud from the ground and heals a man born blind. He can use anything to bring healing. And there was trust needed from everybody here. The blind man, for sure. I mean, he's been blind since birth. Do you think it was easy for him to receive mud on his eyes? I tend to, there's a chance, you cross-reference this. We've been cross-referencing this as we always do with other gospels, just so smart to do that. That's why we have 4 of them. We cross-reference them. We press into the story of Jesus that way. And so maybe this was the same blind man who was crying out, heal me, heal me, heal me, from the other gospels. But in John's gospel, uniquely, it doesn't say that. And so we are invited to maybe see this side of, just thinking about, was this person possibly embarrassed, born blind, and getting mud put on his eyes? I mean, was that an easy process? I think John's gospel gives us some invitation to think about that. Even if it is just speculation, so what? Go ahead and just speculate for a moment. Because think about your own life. Has it been easy to trust in Christ's healing? Or has it required trust? Has it required vulnerability? Has it required pressing through? But what if it doesn't work out on the other side and I'm left with nothing but mud on dried up dirt. Either trust or desperation was needed. I think we can all agree on that, yeah? Either trust or desperation. But Jesus makes mud that can heal. He can pull the fragments of your life together. He can open space for your healing, and he can shepherd you through the season you're walking through. He can. Be open to Jesus using what you might not expect, right? And when Jesus says, go wash, so listen, when you notice that, go wash. So when we sense Christ is prompting us to take a step of faith, friend, when we take that step of obedience or repentance or growth or vulnerability, whatever it is, trust it in Christ. Release the result and trust it to Christ. Trust it to Christ. You can. Look what he does here. We can trust him. John 9, 8-12. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some were saying, it is he. Others were saying, no, it can't, but it's someone like him, it says. No, but it is someone like him. Let me just stop there. See what's happened? Is some can't even believe it. It's just got to be somebody that looks like him. There's no way. We've seen him begging and blind his whole life, right? The verses go on. He kept saying, I am he. But they kept asking, then how were your eyes opened? He answered, the man called Jesus made mud. What an explanation of a life change. How did your life change? Because the man called Jesus made mud. That's why. Spread it on my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. Then I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. It's a fascinating end to this passage. Where is he? I don't know. We look at, we can get the next slide pulled up, please. Jesus sheds light on his behind the scenes, invisible healing works. There's the visible church, and then there are the invisible works of God. We lean into one while we also hope for the other. There's a lot to fill in on the bulletin. I'll leave that up there for a while for you, but let me explain what I mean. We see this with Jesus. Do you remember the wedding at Cana? We're on the sixth sign of light. Do you remember the wedding? Were you here for the wedding? The water to wine? What did Jesus say to Mary? Do you remember? He said, it's not yet my time. It's not yet my time. We see this theme as Jesus shows us his divinity, shows the disciples and those around him his divinity. Jesus is not doing this for publicity. He's working the works of God in somewhat this invisible way, right? And even the man healed, where's Jesus now? I don't know. Jesus just heals him and moves on. Not because he doesn't care. It's just this fascinating thing we call the messianic secret. That's what we call this. Jesus is divine, but it's invisible. It's quiet, it's behind the scenes, saving and healing and calling people from sin cycles to healing and better ways of life in him. And today the church can be seen as the works of God, right? If we follow the ways of Jesus, create spaces for healing, for example. And so there's the visible church in the work we do as we follow Jesus. And then there's still, this is what I don't want us to miss, there's still the invisible works of God that are not dependent upon or attached to us. Jesus can work through and when and however he wants, right? This is not at all connected to the disciples' faith. They're not making the mud. It's still that way, thank God, because there are so many times where we don't have the answers to the questions, and only Jesus does. And we trust him. Yes, we still press into the visible work as best we can, the ways of Jesus. And we are so hopeful that God is still working his invisible works. It still happens, and we should keep hoping that it does, that God works behind the scenes, doing what we cannot do, going where we cannot go, reaching where we fail to reach, healing where only he can. So we lean into the visible church and rededicate commitment to letting church be, as the Spirit leads, a place that somehow, by his grace, by his mercy, works the works of God. We're just desperate for the Spirit to show up, provide mercy, that we might be a place that works the works of God somehow. And we press into that. We rededicate to that. And we hope, Jesus, keep working your miraculous, invisible work behind the scenes of us, behind the scenes of people's lives. We hope Jesus keeps doing that. To open the eyes of the blind, to open my eyes, to open your eyes to who Jesus is, right? And that's us. You know, we end up, hopefully at the end of this passage, we end up realizing kind of like the neighbors were like, well, where is he? Because I'd like him to put mud on my eyes too. And hopefully by the end of this passage, that's where we're at. We're one of the neighbors saying, well, where is he? Show me where he is, because I need some of that. I need this touch. I need this mud. I need this one you call Jesus to open my eyes to. To open my eyes to. And so we end up enlightened by Jesus, right, in these ways, and hopefully seeing a bit more clearly as Jesus performs his sixth sign of divinity, healing a man born blind. And may we all be healed by Jesus in the ways we need it, and may we work the works of God as best we can to create spaces for others to be healed in the Spirit's presence, in the presence of Christ. Yet not us, but Christ through us, right? We're going to stand and sing that song together. Yet not us, but Christ through us. I invite you to stand. Let's sing together.